The dust hung heavy in the air as Willow Zale clutched the worn letter in her trembling hands, its message as cold as the icy stairs that followed her through town. Divorce approved, it read, the two words that effectively ended her life as she knew it in Boston society. The year was 1875, and at 26, she had become something worse than a spinster. She was damaged goods. The stagecoach rattled beneath her as it traveled the rough road to Silverwater Creek, a mining town turned cattle settlement nestled in the rolling plains of Wyoming territory. Willow pressed her forehead against the window, watching as the landscape changed from fertile farmland to rugged wilderness. The other passengers, an elderly couple and a traveling salesman, had long since stopped attempting conversation with the quiet woman in the corner. Her father's words still rang in her ears. "No decent man will ever want you now. You've been marked, Willow, tainted by scandal." Her mother had been more practical but no less cruel. "You can stay with your aunt in Silverwater Creek. At least there, no one knows your shame. The shame." That's what they called it when Edward, her husband of barely 2 years, had abandoned her for a French opera singer. Somehow, society had decided it was Willow's fault. She must have been cold, unloving, inadequate. The whispers followed her everywhere in Boston. Poor Edward, saddled with such a plain, barren wife. The stagecoach lurched to a stop, jolting Willow from her thoughts. Silverwater Creek loomed before her, a collection of wooden buildings straddling a wide dirt road. The settlement was larger than she'd expected, with a general store, a saloon, a small church, and various other establishments lining the main street. "End of the line, madam," the driver called, already unloading luggage from the roof. Willow gathered her skirts and stepped down into the dust, immediately regretting her choice of footwear. Her fine Boston boots, with their delicate leather and modest heels, weren't made for the unpaved streets of a frontier town. "Miss Zale." A thin woman with steel-gray hair approached, squinting at Willow through wire-rimmed spectacles. "I'm Martha, your aunt's housekeeper. She sent me to collect you." Willow nodded, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you, I appreciate it." Martha eyed Willow's trunk dubiously. "Tom," she called to a boy lounging nearby, "come help with the ladies' things. We'll take the wagon." As they loaded her belongings, Willow felt the weight of curious stares from passers-by. Even here, hundreds of miles from Boston, she felt exposed, as though her failure as a wife was written across her face. The wagon ride to her aunt's home at the edge of town was mercifully short. Aunt Beatrice's house was a modest 2-story structure with a wraparound porch and neat flower beds. It looked welcoming, but Willow couldn't shake the feeling that she was being sent to exile rather than sanctuary. Her aunt greeted her at the door, her resemblance to Willow's father unmistakable in the sharp blue eyes and prominent nose. "You've arrived safely, I see. Good. Martha will show you to your room. Dinner is at 6. With that abrupt welcome, Aunt Beatrice returned to her sitting room, leaving Willow to follow the housekeeper upstairs. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a pine dresser, and a window overlooking the rolling plains beyond town. Willow sat on the edge of the bed once Martha had left, finally allowing tears to fall. This was to be her life now, hidden away in a frontier town where she knew no one, where her Boston education and social graces meant nothing. "You've been wanted all along," Edward had whispered on their wedding night. What cruel lies men told. Willow spent the next week establishing a routine. She rose early, helped Martha with household tasks, took tea with her aunt in the afternoons, and retired early to read or write in her journal. Aunt Beatrice, though not unkind, made it clear that Willow's presence was an obligation rather than a pleasure. "Your father has arranged for you to help at the schoolhouse," Aunt Beatrice announced one evening. "Starting Monday, Mrs. Henderson needs an assistant, and it will give you something useful to do." Willow nodded, grateful for the opportunity despite the manner of its delivery. "Thank you. I did enjoy my studies, and I've always thought teaching might suit me." "Yes, well," Aunt Beatrice sniffed. "It's not as though you have other prospects now. The words stung, but Willow had grown accustomed to such barbs. What hurt more was knowing they were true. Monday morning dawned clear and cool. Willow dressed carefully in her plainest gown, a dove gray cotton with minimal trimming. She pinned her honey blonde hair into a severe bun at the nape of her neck and walked the half-mile to the schoolhouse, a simple wooden structure at the western end of town. Mrs. Henderson proved to be a harried woman of about 40 with a perpetual ink stain on her right index finger. "Miss Zale, thank heavens, the children will be arriving any moment. Can you take the younger ones for their letters while I work with the older students on geography?" Willow found herself seated at a small table surrounded by 8 children between the ages of 5 and 7, all watching her with wide, curious eyes. "Good morning," she said, finding her voice stronger than expected. "I'm Miss Zale, and I'll be helping Mrs. Henderson from now on. Shall we begin with our letters?" By mid-morning, Willow had settled into a rhythm with the children. They were eager learners for the most part, though young Tommy Roberts seemed more interested in pulling Sally Watson's braids than in practicing his alphabet. "Tommy," Willow said firmly, "hands to yourself, please. Show me how well you can write your name instead." The boy grinned, revealing a missing front tooth, and picked up his slate pencil with determined concentration. When the noon bell rang, the children scattered to collect their lunch pails, and Willow stepped outside to enjoy the fresh air. The schoolyard overlooked a meadow where several horses grazed, and beyond that, the beginnings of a large cattle ranch. As she watched, a rider appeared on the horizon, moving at an easy trot toward town. Even from a distance, there was something compelling about the man's posture, confident, at home in the saddle in a way that spoke of years spent on horseback. As he drew closer, Willow could make out broad shoulders beneath a worn leather vest and a hat pulled low over his face. She was about to turn back inside when the rider looked up, and for a brief moment their eyes met across the distance. Willow felt an unexpected flutter in her chest and quickly looked away, chiding herself for such a girlish reaction to a stranger. "Miss Zale," Mrs. Henderson called from the doorway. "Could you help me with something, please?" Grateful for the interruption to her thoughts, Willow hurried back inside. The afternoon passed quickly, and by the time the children were dismissed, she had almost forgotten about the rider. Almost, but not quite. The next few weeks fell into a pattern. Mornings at the schoolhouse, afternoons helping Martha with household tasks or assisting Aunt Beatrice with her correspondence, evenings spent in quiet reading or needlework. Willow found the simplicity surprisingly soothing after the constant social demands of Boston. The children had warmed to her quickly, and even Mrs. Henderson had begun to rely on Willow's organizational skills and patience with the more challenging students. For the first time in years, Willow felt genuinely useful. She was returning from the schoolhouse one Friday afternoon when she noticed unusual activity at the general store. A group of men were unloading supplies from wagons' ranch hands, by the look of them, stocking up for the coming winter. Willow kept her head down as she passed, uncomfortable with the attention a lone woman often attracted in town. But as she hurried by, a deep voice called out, "Afternoon, madam." Startled, Willow looked up to find herself facing the rider she'd seen from the schoolyard weeks earlier. Up close, he was even more imposing, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and wind. His eyes, though, were startlingly gentle, the warm brown of coffee with a hint of cream. "Good afternoon," she replied, proper Boston manners taking over before she could think better of it. "Grant Ryder," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Foreman at the RRR, Willow Zale," she responded automatically. "I assist at the schoolhouse." A smile flickered across his face, transforming the hard lines into something altogether more approachable. "The new teacher. The kids in town haven't stopped talking about you." Willow felt a blush warming her cheeks. "I'm only an assistant." "Well, Miss Zale, you've made quite an impression all the same." His eyes lingered on her face a moment longer than was strictly proper. But there was nothing improper in his gaze, only a kind of honest appreciation that Willow hadn't experienced in a very long time. Before she could respond, one of the ranch hands called out, "Grant." "Where do you want these barrels?" "Excuse me," Grant said, tipping his hat again before turning away. Willow continued her walk home, aware of a strange lightness in her step that hadn't been there before. It was foolish, of course. A brief, polite exchange with a ranch foreman meant nothing. But it had been so long since a man had looked at her with anything other than pity or disdain. That evening, as Willow helped Martha prepare dinner, the housekeeper surprised her with conversation. "I saw you speaking with Grant Ryder in town today." Willow nearly dropped the potato she was peeling. "You know him?" Martha nodded, her hands never pausing in their work. "Everyone knows Grant, been foreman at the RRR for 5 years now. Good man, fair to his hands, respectful to women, not like some in these parts." The RRR is that a large operation, one of the biggest in the territory, owns a businessman from Chicago who rarely visits, leaves everything to Grant. Martha glanced at Willow with knowing eyes. "He's not married, if you're wondering." "I wasn't," Willow protested too quickly. Martha's knowing smile said she didn't believe a word of it. The following Tuesday, Willow was supervising the children's lunchtime when she noticed a rider approaching the schoolhouse. Her heart gave a traitorous leap as she recognized Grant Ryder's broad-shouldered silhouette. He dismounted smoothly, tying his horse a handsome chestnut gelding to the hitching post before approaching with what appeared to be a book in his hand. "Miss Zale," he greeted her, removing his hat. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at the nape of his neck. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all. The children are just finishing their lunch." Willow gestured to where the students were scattered across the schoolyard, some playing games, others eating from their lunch pails. "I found this at the general store and thought of your school." He held out the book, a nearly new copy of Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. "I've read it myself, thought the older children might enjoy it." Willow accepted the book, touched by the thoughtful gesture. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Ryder. I'm sure they'll love it." "Grant, please." His smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. "Mr. Ryder makes me feel like my father." "Then you must call me Willow," she replied, surprising herself with the informality. "Willow," he repeated, as though testing the name. "It suits you." A shout from the schoolyard drew her attention, 2 boys locked in a tussle over a toy. "Excuse me," she said, hurrying to separate them. By the time order was restored, Grant had remounted his horse. He tipped his hat to her before riding away, leaving Willow with the strange sensation that something significant had just occurred, though she couldn't have said what. That night, Willow found herself unable to sleep, her mind replaying the brief encounter with Grant. It was ridiculous, this schoolgirl fluttering over a man she barely knew. She was a divorced woman, for heaven's sake a social pariah. Men like Grant Ryder didn't court women like her, yet the memory of his smile, the way he'd said her name, kept returning. Autumn progressed, bringing cooler weather and preparation for the harvest festival. The entire town of Silverwater Creek became involved, from the ranchers bringing in beef for the communal feast to the schoolchildren practicing songs for the evening's entertainment. Willow threw herself into the preparations, helping the children craft decorations for the town square and rehearsing their recitations. For the first time since arriving in Wyoming, she felt like part of the community rather than an outsider. The morning of the festival dawned clear and cool. Aunt Beatrice, to Willow's surprise, insisted she wear her blue silk gown, one of the few nice dresses she'd brought from Boston. "No sense in looking dowdy just because you're living in the wilderness," her aunt declared. "Besides, your mother would have a fit if she knew I was letting you attend public gatherings in everyday clothes." Willow didn't argue, secretly pleased to have a reason to wear something pretty again. The dress was simple by Boston standards, a deep cornflower blue with modest lace trim, but here in Silverwater Creek, it would certainly stand out. Martha helped her arrange her hair, twisting the honey blonde locks into an elegant knot with a few soft tendrils framing her face. "There," the housekeeper said with satisfaction. "Now you look like yourself again." Willow studied her reflection in the small mirror above her dresser. The woman looking back seemed both familiar and strange, like meeting an old friend after a long separation. There was color in her cheeks that hadn't been there in Boston, and a clarity in her eyes that spoke of restful nights and purposeful days. The town square had been transformed with bunting and lanterns, trestle tables laden with food, and a wooden platform for dancing. Children ran everywhere, excitement making them wild, while their parents chatted in groups or helped with last-minute arrangements. Willow made her way to Mrs. Henderson, who was organizing the children for their performance. "You look lovely, Miss Zale," the older teacher said warmly. "I hardly recognized you without chalk dust on your sleeves," Willow laughed, a genuine sound that surprised even her. "Thank you. Can I help with anything? Everything's under control. You should enjoy yourself for once." Mrs. Henderson nodded toward the refreshment table. "I believe Mr. Ryder was asking after you earlier." Willow's heart skipped, but she kept her voice casual. "Was he? I haven't seen him in a few weeks. The ranch must keep him busy." Mrs. Henderson hummed noncommittally, but her eyes held a knowing twinkle. The festival officially began with a speech from the mayor, followed by the children's performance. Willow watched proudly as her young students recited their poems without faltering, even little Tommy Roberts, who had practiced for weeks to overcome his shyness. As twilight descended, lanterns were lit, and the local fiddle band took their places for dancing. Willow stood at the edge of the crowd, content to watch as couples formed on the makeshift dance floor. Miss Zale. The deep voice behind her sent a shiver down Willow's spine. She turned to find Grant Ryder standing closer than expected, looking entirely different from the working rancher she'd met before. He was freshly shaven, his dark hair neatly trimmed, wearing a clean white shirt with a black string tie and a well-cut jacket. "Mr. Ryder," she responded, pleased that her voice remained steady despite her racing heart. "Grant," he reminded her, his eyes warm as they took in her appearance. "You look beautiful, Willow." The compliment, delivered so simply, brought heat to her cheeks. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself." His laugh was rich and genuine. High praise from a Boston lady. He extended his hand. "Would you honor me with a dance?" Willow hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. "I'd like that." Grant led her onto the dance floor just as the musicians began a waltz. His hand at her waist was firm but respectful, guiding her through the steps with unexpected grace for such a physically powerful man. "You dance very well," Willow observed, surprised. "My mother insisted all her sons learn. Said no woman wants a man who steps on her toes." His smile was rueful. "She was determined we'd be gentlemen despite growing up on the frontier. She succeeded, it seems. With me, at least, can't speak for my brothers." His expression grew more serious. "I've been meaning to ride by the schoolhouse again, but we've been busy with the fall roundup. I understand. The ranch must require constant attention." "It does." Grant guided her through a turn, his movements perfectly matched to hers. "But I find myself thinking about the schoolhouse and its teacher more often than I should." Willow's breath caught at the admission. "Mr. Ryder, Grant," he corrected gently. "Grant," she amended. "I should tell you. That is, you should know that I'm—" The words stuck in her throat. How did one announce one's divorced status in polite conversation? His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "I know about your situation, Willow. This is a small town. People talk." She stiffened, ready to pull away, but his steady gaze held her in place. "It changes nothing about how I see you," he continued quietly. "Whatever happened in Boston belongs to the past." The music ended before Willow could respond, leaving her with emotions too tangled to unravel. They stepped apart as the crowd applauded the musicians. "Would you walk with me?" Grant asked. "Just to the edge of the square. The night air is pleasant." Willow nodded, grateful for the chance to collect her thoughts away from the crowd. They made their way to a quieter corner where wooden benches had been placed beneath a large oak tree. The lantern light barely reached them, creating a pocket of privacy. "I apologize if I spoke too directly," Grant said as they sat. "The frontier has a way of stripping away polite evasions." "No, I appreciate your honesty." Willow smoothed her skirts, gathering courage. "In Boston, my divorce made me an outcast. My own parents could hardly look at me. They sent me here because they couldn't bear the scandal of having a divorced daughter in their home." Grant's expression darkened. "Their loss, then." "You don't understand. A divorced woman is damaged, unwanted." The words her father had thrown at her echoed in her mind. No decent man would choose such a wife. "Is that what they told you?" Grant's voice was gentle but held an undercurrent of anger. "That you'd never be wanted again?" Willow nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "Then they were wrong." His hand found hers on the bench between them, warm and calloused from hard work. "Willow, look at me." She raised her eyes to his, finding them intent and earnest in the dim light. "You've been wanted all along," he said simply. "From the moment I first saw you outside that schoolhouse, watching the horizon as though searching for something. I just didn't know if you were ready to be found." The words stole Willow's breath, so similar to what Edward had said, yet carrying a weight of sincerity her ex-husband had never possessed. "You don't know me," she whispered. "I know enough," Grant replied. "I know you're kind to children who aren't your own. I know you're brave enough to start a new life thousands of miles from everything familiar. I know your smile lights up your whole face when you forget to be guarded." His thumb traced a gentle pattern on the back of her hand. "I'd like the chance to know more." Before Willow could respond, a commotion from the festival drew their attention. The mayor was calling for everyone to gather for the lighting of the harvest bonfire. "We should rejoin the others," Willow said, reluctantly withdrawing her hand from Grant's. He stood, offering her his arm. "Will you allow me to call on you properly? Perhaps Sunday after church." The prospect of seeing him again, of exploring this unexpected connection, filled Willow with both excitement and terror. "I'd like that," she said finally, deciding that courage was worth the risk of pain. Grant smiled, a slow, genuine expression that reached his eyes. "Then, Sunday it is." They returned to the festival, where the bonfire now blazed against the night sky. As they stood among the townsfolk watching the flames dance, Willow was acutely aware of Grant beside her, solid and real in a way that made her previous life in Boston seem like a distant dream. For the first time since the divorce papers had arrived, Willow felt something unfurl inside her, a cautious hope that perhaps her story wasn't over after all. Sunday came with clear skies and mild weather. Willow dressed carefully for church, choosing a green gown that brought out the gold flecks in her hazel eyes. Aunt Beatrice raised an eyebrow at her niece's attention to appearance, but made no comment as they walked to the small wooden church in the center of town. The service was simple but heartfelt, with Reverend Thomas speaking about forgiveness and new beginnings in a way that seemed directed specifically at Willow. When the final hymn ended, she found herself lingering in the pew, reluctant to face the moment of seeing Grant again. "Are you coming, girl?" Aunt Beatrice asked, already halfway to the door. "In a moment," Willow replied, pretending to gather her things. Her aunt's sharp eyes missed nothing. "He's waiting outside, you know, has been watching the door like a hawk since before the service ended." Willow looked up in surprise, both at her aunt's observation and the lack of disapproval in her tone. "Well, don't keep the man waiting," Aunt Beatrice continued, her voice softening slightly. "Grant Ryder is one of the few decent men in this territory. You could do far worse." With that unexpected blessing, her aunt departed, leaving Willow speechless. When she finally emerged from the church, Grant was indeed waiting, standing a respectful distance from the churchgoers who lingered to chat. He wore a clean, dark suit, his hat in his hands, looking both uncomfortable in the formal attire and undeniably handsome. His face brightened when he spotted her. "Miss Zale," he said, approaching with a slight bow, "I was hoping you might join me for a drive this afternoon." Several nearby townswomen paused in their conversations, clearly interested in this development. I'd be delighted, Mr. Ryder, Willow replied, equally formal for the benefit of their audience. Grant offered his arm, leading her to where a smart buggy waited, hitched to a matching pair of bay horses. I borrowed this from the ranch owner's collection, he admitted in a lower voice. Thought you might prefer it to riding horseback for our first outing. The consideration touched her. It's lovely, thank you. He helped her into the seat, his hands strong and sure at her waist, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. With a gentle flick, they were moving down the main street and out toward the open plains beyond town. I thought we might have a picnic, Grant said once they'd left the curious eyes of Silverwater Creek behind. There's a nice spot by the creek about 2 miles out. If that suits you, it sounds perfect, Willow replied, relaxing as the tension of being observed fell away. I haven't been outside town much since arriving. Then you haven't seen the best parts of Wyoming yet, Grant smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. The land opens up once you get away from the settlements, makes a person feel both small and significant all at once. That's a poetic way of looking at it, he chuckled, a warm sound that Willow found she enjoyed greatly. Don't tell my ranch hands, they think I'm nothing but practical. Your secret is safe with me. Willow found herself smiling more easily than she had in months. The spot Grant had chosen was indeed beautiful, a gentle bend in the creek where cottonwood trees provided dappled shade and wildflowers still bloomed, despite the advancing autumn. He spread a blanket beneath the largest tree and produced a basket that contained cold chicken, fresh bread, apple preserves, and a bottle of cider. This is wonderful, Willow said as they settled onto the blanket. Did you arrange it all yourself, Mrs.? Lawson at the boarding house helped, Grant admitted. I'm a decent cook over a campfire, but picnics require a woman's touch, she insisted. They ate in comfortable conversation, with Grant sharing stories of ranch life and Willow talking about her experiences at the schoolhouse. It felt remarkably easy, as though they'd known each other far longer than a few short weeks. May I ask you something personal? Grant said after a pause in the conversation. You don't have to answer if it makes you uncomfortable. Willow tensed slightly but nodded. You may ask. What happened in Boston? The true version, not the one your parents believe. The question caught her off guard with its directness, yet there was no judgment in Grant's expression, only genuine interest. Willow looked down at her hands, collecting her thoughts. I married Edward Blackwell when I was 23. It was a good match by society's standards. He had money and connections. My family had an old name but dwindling fortunes. She paused, the memories still painful despite the distance. I thought I loved him. I certainly tried to be a good wife. Grant remained silent, giving her space to continue at her own pace. After a year, it became clear that Edward had other interests, other women. He was discreet at first, but eventually grew careless. When I confronted him, he told me I was inadequate, too plain, too bookish, too cold. The words still stung, even now. When I didn't conceive after 2 years of marriage, he called me barren, said there was no point in remaining tied to a wife who couldn't give him children. Did the doctors say you couldn't have children? Grant asked quietly. Willow shook her head. No doctor ever examined me. Edward simply decided it must be my fault. She took a deep breath. Then he met a French opera singer who was performing in Boston. Within a month, he'd left for Paris with her. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. And your parents blamed you for his actions. Grant's voice had hardened. They believed I must have failed him in some fundamental way. That's how Boston society works. The woman is always at fault when a marriage collapses. Willow finally looked up, meeting Grant's gaze directly. They told me no decent man would ever want me again. That I was tainted by scandal, damaged goods. Grant's expression darkened. Your parents and your ex-husband sound like people I wouldn't care to meet. The vehemence in his voice startled a laugh from Willow. They wouldn't think much of you either, I'm afraid. A rancher from Wyoming territory would hardly impress Boston's elite. Their loss, Grant said simply. He reached across the blanket, his hand covering hers. For what it's worth, I think you're the most interesting woman I've ever met, and certainly not plain or cold. The warmth in his eyes made Willow's breath catch. "You barely know me." "I know enough to want to know more," he replied, "if you'll let me." The moment hung between them, fragile and full of possibility. Then Grant smiled and withdrew his hand. "We should head back before your aunt sends out a search party." The drive back to town was comfortable, filled with lighter conversation about books they'd both read and places they'd visited. By the time they reached Aunt Beatrice's house, Willow felt as though something fundamental had shifted between them, a foundation laid for whatever might come next. Grant helped her down from the buggy, his hands lingering slightly longer than necessary at her waist. "Thank you for joining me today," he said, his voice lower than it had been during their drive. "I enjoyed myself very much," Willow replied truthfully. "May I call on you again, perhaps next Saturday?" "I'd like that." She smiled up at him, no longer feeling the need to guard her expressions. Grant's eyes dropped briefly to her lips, and for a heart-stopping moment, Willow thought he might kiss her. Instead, he took her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Until Saturday, then. Willow watched him drive away, her hand still tingling from the touch of his lips. Only when the buggy had disappeared from view did she turn to enter the house, finding Aunt Beatrice watching from the window. "Well," her aunt said, "it seems you've made quite an impression on our Mr. Ryder." Willow couldn't suppress her smile. "He's a good man, Aunt Beatrice." "Yes, he is." Her aunt's expression softened unexpectedly. "And you deserve a good man, Willow, whatever your father may have told you." The words, so different from what she'd come to expect from her family, brought tears to Willow's eyes. She crossed the room and, before she could reconsider, hugged her aunt. After a startled moment, Aunt Beatrice's arms came around her in a brief, awkward embrace. "None of that now," the older woman said, stepping back. "There's still time before dinner. Why don't you tell me about your picnic?" That evening, as Willow prepared for bed, she caught herself humming a simple, happy sound she hadn't made in years. The realization brought both joy and fear. Joy at the rediscovery of her own capacity for happiness, and fear that it might be taken away again. "Not this time," she whispered to her reflection. "This time will be different." The days that followed took on a new rhythm. Mornings at the schoolhouse, afternoons helping Aunt Beatrice, and increasingly frequent visits from Grant. Sometimes he would simply stop by for tea on his way to or from town. Other times, he would take her driving or walking along the creek, Silverwater Creek noticed, of course. A town that small couldn't help but observe the growing attachment between the schoolteacher and the ranch foreman. But unlike Boston, where such attention would have been laden with judgment, the people of Silverwater Creek seemed genuinely pleased. "Mr. Ryder brought you flowers again, Mrs. Henderson remarked one Monday morning when Willow arrived at the schoolhouse with fresh wildflowers for the children's nature table. "He's certainly persistent." "There for the children's botany lesson," Willow protested, though her blush betrayed her. Mrs. Henderson smiled knowingly. "Of course they are, dear," even the children had noticed. "Miss Zale, are you going to marry Mr. Ryder?" little Sally Watson asked during arithmetic lessons. "Sally," Willow exclaimed, flustered, "that's not an appropriate question." "But Tommy says his pa says Mr. Ryder is sweet on you," the girl persisted. "And when people are sweet on each other, they get married." The other children giggled, and Willow struggled to maintain her composure. "Let's return to our numbers, shall we?" As October gave way to November, the weather turned sharper. The first snow dusted the plains, melting by midday but warning of the winter to come. Grant began checking on Aunt Beatrice's woodpile and making sure her roof was sound for the coming cold. "You don't need to do all this," Willow told him one afternoon as he split logs in the yard. Grant paused, leaning on the axe handle. "I know I don't need to, I want to." His gaze held her steadily. "I care about your well-being, Willow, and your aunt's by extension." The simple declaration warmed her more than any fire could have. "Thank you," he smiled, that slow, genuine expression that made her heart flutter. "Besides, it gives me an excuse to see you more often." As if they needed excuses anymore. Grant had become a regular visitor to Aunt Beatrice's home, joining them for Sunday dinners and occasional weekday suppers. Even Aunt Beatrice had warmed to him, engaging him in conversations about local politics and the cattle business. The first real winter storm arrived in late November, blanketing Silverwater Creek in 8 inches of snow and bringing bitter winds that rattled the windows. School was canceled, and the town hunkered down to wait out the worst of it. On the second day of the storm, just as Willow was beginning to worry about cabin fever, a knock came at the door. Martha opened it to find Grant on the porch, snow covering his shoulders and hat, his cheeks red from cold. "Grant," Willow exclaimed, hurrying forward. "What are you doing out in this weather?" "Checking on you," he replied, stamping snow from his boots before stepping inside. "The ranch is secure, so I rode into town to make sure everyone has what they need." "You rode through this?" Willow couldn't hide her concern. Grant grinned, looking boyish despite the ice in his beard. "Blizzard's letting up. Besides, thunder knows his way even when I can't see 2 feet ahead." He pulled a package from inside his coat. "Brought you something." Inside was a book, a new copy of Little Women that must have arrived on the last stage coach before the storm. "I remembered you saying yours was falling apart from so many readings," Grant explained. Willow ran her fingers over the embossed cover, touched beyond words by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you," she said softly. "This is perfect." Something in her expression made Grant's smile fade into a more intense look. He took a step closer, close enough that Willow could see the melting snowflakes on his eyelashes. "Mr. Ryder," Aunt Beatrice's voice broke the moment. "Since you've braved the storm to check on us, the least we can do is offer you hot coffee and lunch." Grant stepped back, clearing his throat. "That would be most appreciated, madam." The storm kept Grant at the house longer than intended, as the afternoon winds picked up again, making travel dangerous. By evening, Aunt Beatrice had insisted he stay the night rather than risk the journey back to the ranch. "You can take the spare room off the kitchen," she declared. "Better than freezing to death between here and the Triple R." "I don't want to impose," Grant began. "Nonsense. Martha's already made up the bed." Aunt Beatrice's tone brooked no argument. "Willow, show Mr. Ryder where he can wash up before dinner." The evening that followed was one of the most pleasant Willow could remember. They ate Martha's hearty stew by lamplight, then gathered in the sitting room where Grant entertained them with stories of his early days on the frontier. When Aunt Beatrice retired early, claiming fatigue, Willow and Grant continued talking by the fire. "Tell me more about Boston," Grant said, settling into the armchair across from her. "Not the bad parts, the good memories." Willow considered the request, surprised to find that good memories still existed beneath the pain of her final months there. "I loved the libraries," she said finally, "and the bookshops. There was one on Tremont Street where the owner would let me sit and read for hours if it wasn't busy." "What else?" "The public garden in spring when the tulips bloom." Listening to the Boston Symphony Orchestra, Edward's family had a subscription. She smiled at a particular memory. "And my father's sister, my other aunt, used to take me to the Museum of Fine Arts on Saturday afternoons." She believed every young lady should appreciate beauty. "She sounds like a wise woman." She was. She died before. Willow trailed off. "I think she would have been kinder about the divorce than my parents were." Grant leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Your parents were wrong, Willow. About you, about your worth, about everything." The conviction in his voice made her eyes sting with unshed tears. "It's hard to unlearn what you've been told all your life." "Then let me help you relearn." Grant's voice was gentle but firm. "Every day if you'll let me." Willow looked at him, this man who had entered her life so unexpectedly and become so important so quickly. "Why me, Grant? There are plenty of unmarried women in Silverwater Creek who haven't been divorced, who don't carry my kind of baggage." Grant held her gaze steadily. "Because none of them are you." He stood and crossed to her chair, kneeling before her so they were eye to eye. "Because from the moment I saw you outside that schoolhouse, looking both lost and determined, I wanted to know your story. And the more I learn, the more I admire you." He took her hands in his. Your ex-husband was a fool who couldn't recognize the treasure he had. Your parents are blinded by social conventions that mean nothing out here. But I see you, Willow Zale. I see your kindness, your intelligence, your courage. And I'm falling in love with everything I see. The declaration left Willow breathless. Grant, you don't need to say anything now, he interrupted gently. I know this is fast. I know you have reasons to be cautious. Just know that when you're ready, I'll be waiting. Before she could respond, he leaned forward and pressed a soft, brief kiss to her lips, a question as much as a statement. Willow found herself answering without words, her hand coming up to touch his cheek as the kiss deepened. When they finally separated, Grant's eyes were dark with emotion. I should go before I forget myself entirely, he murmured, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. Willow nodded, though part of her wanted to ask him to stay. Good night, Grant. Good night, Willow. He pressed one more gentle kiss to her forehead before retreating to the kitchen stairs that led to his room for the night. Alone by the dying fire, Willow touched her lips, still tingling from his kiss. For the first time in years, the future seemed full of possibility rather than dread. The storm cleared overnight, leaving a transformed landscape of pristine white broken only by the tracks of birds and small animals. Grant departed after breakfast, promising to return in a few days once his duties at the ranch were complete. Be careful, Willow said as she walked him to the door. He smiled down at her, his eyes warm despite the cold morning air. Always. He hesitated, then leaned down to kiss her cheek, a gesture both proper enough for Aunt Beatrice's watchful eye and intimate enough to bring color to Willow's cheeks. The days that followed passed in a flurry of activity as Silverwater Creek dug itself out from the storm. School resumed, with the children full of stories about their snow-bound adventures. Willow listened indulgently, though her mind often wandered to memories of Grant's kiss by the fire. True to his word, Grant returned 3 days later with an invitation that caught Willow by surprise. The Triple R is hosting a Christmas gathering for the ranch hands and their families, he explained as they sat in Aunt Beatrice's parlor. As foreman, I'm expected to attend. I'd be honored if you would accompany me, Willow, to the ranch. The prospect was both exciting and intimidating. Would that be appropriate? Grant smiled. The owner's wife will be there as hostess, along with several other respectable ladies from town. Your aunt is welcome too, of course. Aunt Beatrice, who had been pretending not to listen from her chair by the window, spoke up. My rheumatism acts up something fierce in the cold, but Willow should certainly go. Martha can accompany her as a chaperone, and so it was decided. The Saturday before Christmas found Willow dressed in her best winter gown, a deep burgundy wool that complemented her coloring, as Grant helped her into his sleigh for the journey to the Triple R. The ranch was larger than Willow had imagined, a sprawling main house built of logs and stone, with numerous outbuildings and bunkhouses spread across the property. Lights blazed from every window, and the sound of music and laughter spilled into the crisp night air. It's beautiful, Willow said as they approached. Grant smiled, clearly pleased by her reaction. Wait until you see inside. Mrs. Crawford, the owner's wife, has been decorating for days. Inside, the ranch house had been transformed into a Christmas wonderland. Evergreen boughs adorned the staircase, red ribbons and candles brightened every surface, and a massive tree dominated one corner of the great room. Ranch hands and their families mingled with townspeople Willow recognized, all enjoying the abundant food and drink. Mrs. Crawford proved to be a gracious hostess, welcoming Willow warmly and introducing her to those she didn't know. Grant has told us so much about you, Miss Zale, the older woman said with a knowing smile. We're delighted you could join us. The evening passed in a pleasant blur of conversation, dancing, and holiday cheer. Grant remained attentive throughout, introducing Willow to his colleagues and ensuring she was never left alone for long. Several of the ranch hands' wives made a point of telling her how much Grant had changed since she'd arrived in town. Never seen the man smile so much, one confided. Used to be all business all the time. As the night drew to a close, Grant suggested a short walk to see the view from the hill behind the house. Martha, tired from the festivities, agreed to wait by the sleigh. The night was clear and cold, with stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. Grant led Willow to a spot overlooking the ranch, the lights of the buildings twinkling below like earthbound stars. "What do you think?" he asked, his arm around her waist to steady her in the snow. "It's magnificent," Willow breathed, taking in the vast landscape bathed in moonlight. "I never imagined Wyoming could be so beautiful. It grows on you," Grant said softly, "especially when you have someone to share it with." Willow turned to face him, finding his expression serious in the moonlight. "Grant, I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "A Christmas gift, I hope you'll accept it." He withdrew a small box and opened it to reveal a delicate silver ring set with a modest pearl. "This was my mother's," he explained. "She gave it to me before she died, said I should give it to the woman who captured my heart." Willow's breath caught as understanding dawned. "Grant, are you?" "I am." He took her gloved hand in his. "Willow Zale, I know we've known each other only a few months, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I want to build a life with you, here on the frontier where the only thing that matters is what's in a person's heart, not their past." He knelt in the snow, still holding her hand. "Will you marry me, Willow? Will you be my wife, my partner, the mother of my children?" Tears filled Willow's eyes, blurring the stars above. For a moment, her parents' voices echoed in her mind. "No decent man will ever want you again," but Grant's steady gaze banished them. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, I will marry you, Grant Ryder." His smile was brilliant as he rose, slipping the ring onto her finger even through her glove. Then his arms were around her, his lips finding hers in a kiss that contained all the promise of their future together. When they finally separated, breathless and laughing, Grant pressed his forehead to hers. "You've been wanted all along, Willow," he murmured. "From the moment I first saw you, you've been wanted all along." The words, spoken under the vast Wyoming sky, healed something in Willow's heart that she had thought beyond repair. Here, in the arms of a man who saw her true worth, the whispers of Boston society and her parents' disappointment faded to nothing. She had been wanted all along. And now, finally, she was home. The wedding took place on a clear spring day in April 1876, with wildflowers dotting the plains and new leaves budding on the cottonwoods. The entire town of Silverwater Creek turned out for the occasion, filling the small church to overflowing. Willow wore a gown of ivory silk that Martha and Aunt Beatrice had worked on for weeks, with delicate embroidery at the bodice and a modest train. Her honey blonde hair was arranged with white rosebuds, and she carried a bouquet of prairie flowers gathered that morning. Reverend Thomas spoke of new beginnings and second chances, words that brought tears to more eyes than just the bride's. When Grant placed the gold band on Willow's finger beside her mother's pearl ring, his hands were steady, but his voice caught with emotion as he repeated his vows. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thomas declared to the beaming couple. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." The celebration afterward was the largest Silverwater Creek had seen since its founding. Tables groaned with food contributed by every household in town, and the dancing continued well into the night. Even Aunt Beatrice was persuaded to join for one dance, partnered by the town mayor. As twilight descended, Grant led his new wife away from the festivities toward a waiting buggy decorated with ribbons and flowers. "Ready to see your new home, Mrs. Ryder?" he asked, his eyes alight with joy. "More than ready, Mr. Ryder," Willow replied, her heart full to bursting. Their home wasn't the main ranch house, as some had expected, but a smaller, charming cottage half a mile away that Grant had been secretly preparing for months. Set on a gentle rise overlooking the creek, with a wide porch and windows that caught the morning sun, it was everything Willow could have dreamed of. "Welcome home," Grant said as he carried her over the threshold. It's not Boston, but it's perfect, Willow interrupted, taking in the polished wooden floors, the stone fireplace, the bookshelves already filled with her books alongside Grant's. It's absolutely perfect. Later, as they lay in each other's arms in the bedroom lit only by moonlight, Grant traced the curve of Willow's cheek with gentle fingers. Happy, Mrs. Ryder, completely, she replied, marveling at how right it felt to be here with him, how natural. I never thought I could be this happy again. Get used to it, he murmured, pulling her closer. I plan to spend the rest of my life making you happy. I'll hold you to that promise, Willow said, sealing the words with a kiss. The years that followed proved that some promises are kept faithfully. Grant and Willow built a life together on the Wyoming frontier that exceeded both their dreams. The Triple R prospered under Grant's management, eventually becoming his own when the Chicago owner decided to sell. Willow continued teaching until the birth of their first child, a daughter they named Alina after Grant's mother. 2 sons followed, James and Thomas, and finally another daughter, Rose. The Ryder children grew up strong and free, educated by their mother, and taught the ways of the land by their father. Aunt Beatrice remained in Silverwater Creek, becoming an honorary grandmother to the Ryder children and a respected elder in the growing community. Even Willow's parents eventually thawed, making the journey from Boston to meet their grandchildren when Alina was 5. The reunion was cautious at first, but time and the evidence of Willow's happiness gradually healed the breach. As for Boston society and their judgments, they ceased to matter in the face of the rich, full life Willow built with Grant. The whispers that had once haunted her faded like morning mist under the bright Wyoming sun. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Grant surprised Willow with a special gift, a locket containing miniature portraits of their children, engraved with the words that had changed her life. You've been wanted all along. Still happy? He asked as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the plains in gold and crimson. Willow, her honey blonde hair now threaded with silver, smiled at the man who had seen her worth when she herself had forgotten it. More than I ever imagined possible, she replied truthfully. You were right, you know. About what? Grant asked, his hand warm around hers. I was wanted all along, Willow said softly. I just needed to find my way here to discover it. Grant brought her hand to his lips, kissing the rings he'd placed there 2 decades earlier. And I'll keep wanting you, Willow Ryder, until the stars fade and the mountains crumble. In the gathering twilight, with the sounds of their children's laughter drifting from inside the house, Willow knew with absolute certainty that some stories do have happy endings after all.